but I have clicked it. Right, we are indeed now live, which is good. That's a start. I would like to say before we start, of course, that you are live on Recent UK. Please do not swear, because I'm joined by two, well, they like swearing, put it that way. Alex Armstrong is not one to go without when bashing the left, I think it's safe to say.
It's my freedom of speech, Darren, come on.
Absolutely. And Chloe Dobbs as well, no stranger to the odd swear word herself, but not on this stream, right? This is a swear word free zone. And I bet you I'll be the first person to actually break that rule, by the way.
100% you will.
But Alex and Chloe, thank you very much for your company tonight.
Pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
So tonight we're going to talk about Margaret Thatcher being viewed by the Victoria and Albert Museum in London as a villain tantamount to Hitler and Bin Laden. I kid you not. We'll be discussing the latest in the trans saga, where a solicitor has actually, well, someone has been sued via a solicitor, I should say, who works in the civil service for saying that only women have periods. We really have reached the peak of bonkers Britain, in my opinion. And then we'll be discussing whether or not the Reform Party are far right. The BBC has had to issue a grovelling apology to Reform, to Richard Tice himself, by arguing in an article that they were indeed far right. I mean, I think anyone sort of to the right of Jeremy Corbyn is viewed as far right to the BBC these days. But hey ho, we'll get into that later on. And then we'll discuss GB News and the Ofcom complaint made against them, saying that actually they've broken the rules again, and the Ofcommunists, as I've heard them branded from a certain voice somewhere around these parts.
Not to be named.
Not to be named. No, I will name him, Dan Wooten. I still love Dan to pieces. But
so do I.
And we'll discuss all of that as well. So let's get started, shall we? I've got to start then by talking about this story with Maggie Thatcher, because Chloe mocked up a graphic here. And she says in this graphic, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London has branded Margaret Thatcher a contemporary villain alongside Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler. Why are our taxes funding this complete and utter nonsense? Which is a very good point. Now, if you go over to the actual article, as Chloe mentioned in that piece, the Victoria and Albert Museum is actually viewed as a taxpayer-funded bastion of culture and refinement, right? It hosts fashion shows and all the rest of it. But they took this cheap shot at Margaret Thatcher with this puppet from Spitting Image. Now, it brackets her in with the likes of Adolf Hitler and Osama bin Laden. And I guess my view on this is that the lefty lovies who run these institutions, right, they've never been fans of someone like Margaret Thatcher. They'd rather pontificate about the evils of capitalism than actually acknowledge that Margaret Thatcher saved this country from the brink of economic ruin, right? Let's not forget that in the late 1970s, we had a 3-day working week. Now, this isn't because of eco-extremism, that, you know, the Extinction Rebellion weren't running the joint. This was because we actually couldn't produce energy in order to get the lights on because trade unions had ground the country to a halt. We were in the throes of socialism, looking like a socialist basket case. But to link her to a genocidal maniac and a terrorist mastermind, I think is probably a step too far, Chloe.
I feel like we are losing everything that is great about Britain to wokery. As a Brit, one thing that I'm very proud of about this country and London as a capital city is that we have fantastic museums, exhibitions, theatres. This is something really unique to our culture that we have done very, very well for many years. But now all of those things are just becoming absolutely broken by this wokery, where you go into a museum as someone who's inquisitive and just wants to learn about history and culture, and you're just thrown with all of this woke rubbish where they're clearly just pushing an agenda. We've seen recently a London theatre advertise a black-only theatre night. Yeah. That is genuinely insane. And now this, liking Margaret Thatcher to Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler. Are you insane?
Well, they are insane. But I mean, I'll just read out what it actually says. So it says, over the years, the evil character in this seaside puppet, and it's talking about Punch and Judy, a famous puppet from back in the day. This famous puppet, the show shifted from the devil to unpopular public figures. Unpopular public figures. She won 3 sodding elections, including Adolf Hitler, Margaret Thatcher, and Osama bin Laden, to offer contemporary villains. I mean, what planet, Alex, are these left-wing, latte-sipping, taxpayer-funded idiots living on?
I don't know anymore, Darren. Every week I feel like the shock factor's gone.
Yes, it
because
has.
It's become so normalised. And Chloe just said, perfectly nailed the epitome of this, which is we've gone back to a period of time where people actually want segregation. I mean, what kind of it's such conflict with British values, isn't it? To label great prime minister, our first female prime minister. Let's not forget. They love to forget that part, don't they? They never mention that until it suits them, of course. But to think that she could be compared to Bin Laden. I mean, for goodness sake, what they love to miss out. I mean, I assume, given the fact that the mines did close for so long, that Thatcher was probably done more for the environment than any prime minister in the last 40 years.
It's a very good point.
She's probably got a throne in Greta's house somewhere, actually, a nice shrine to Thatcher.
Well, she should do, but of course she was a conservative icon, so she absolutely won't do. I mean, if you look at the record of communists throughout history, right, communists have left the environment in a worse state ever than capitalism ever has, and that's because of seeking resources where there are none. You don't give a damn about the environment if you haven't got and I was about to say if you haven't got a pot to pee in, but I was about to use the pee as an expletive. But if you haven't got a pot to
Go on,
how long have we been in this for? And I've just broken the rule already. 7 minutes and I'm already effing and jeffing. But I take this really seriously. I remember my grandmother, right? I was really scared to tell her because I found out that my mother bought a council house under right to buy. So obviously I was a lot younger. And I thought, wow, this is a great policy. What a great thing for someone like my mother to actually have, an asset security to pass on to her kids. And I found out this was all down to this Thatcher woman. And I remember asking my nana, my granddad was a miner, so I was a bit, there was a certain amount of trepidation in asking the question. And I said, Nana, what did you think of Margaret Thatcher? And she sort of went a bit sheepish for a few seconds, but she turned and she said, quick as a flash, now she was for Britain. And if the wife of a former miner can turn around and say that, why can the sodding V&A not recognise that maybe, just maybe, Margaret Thatcher was someone that was popular with people not like them, right? Not liberal intelligentsia, well-heeled people who despise everything she stands for because they have some form of liberal guilt, right?
I feel like this is... Sorry, Alex, go on.
No, please, go ahead, Chloe.
What I was going to say is that it seems to me like we always villainize people who actually take action and have a spine and just do something in office. Meanwhile, the people who are currently in number 10 running the country, they don't get villainized for doing nothing, where, however, the inaction is more terrible for this country than action, right? These people are doing nothing and allowing, a housing crisis to run rampant. The country's falling apart, broken Britain as we call it. But they don't get villainized as much as a woman who had the tenacity to turn the country around and take decisive action.
Yeah, so the V&A, by the way, they turned around and they were offered by Mrs. Thatcher's children, so that's Carol and Mark, that actually they were offered clothing that she'd worn throughout her time in office, and they turned it down at the time. They turned their noses up at it. Now, strike me if I'm wrong, Alex, but the Victoria and Albert Museum, they wax lyrical about all of these female figures throughout history, the clothing that they wore, the role they played in history. And these great women, she was a great woman. She transformed Britain from being the sick man of Europe into a thriving, dynamic, modern economy. And she actually did that through the power of market competition, right? Of the entrepreneurial spirit that Britain was once known for, but then it wasn't, and then it was again. But she never stood down to the bullies, right? She never stood down to the naysayers. She was always up for a fight. And they just can't stand the fact that it was the first woman to do that was a Conservative. I think that's what all of this is about.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're wrong, Darren. But I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. If you look at who the people are who are staffing the V&A, who are going into creative arts, then you tend to find they come from quite liberal universities. And you know, as well as I do, Darren, that the people teaching at those universities and the people that are surrounded with them are all staunch lefties, with a massive political and cultural agenda to basically whitewash our country's culture and say Churchill bad, Thatcher bad, and rather than highlight all the incredible achievements of both those people and acknowledge the time that they lived in was different and that our culture was different, they decide to take them down in a modern setting because it's easier for them to win a debate about culture now than it would have been 30, 40 years ago, because of course none of these issues would have been even surfaced in that time, because everyone, including the left back then, would have gone, you're absolutely bonkers, you can't even define what a woman is, are you mad? So it really it seems to me that the penetration of these lefties in our universities and our schools is where this is coming from, because it certainly isn't coming from anywhere else. They're being taught this at school, they're being taught these things are bad, and I really do think, I mean, all the energy that the regulators like Ofcom, which we'll talk about a little bit later, put into policing current freedom of speech, they're not even bothered about what's going on in educational institutions. Look at the takedown of Catherine Birbalsingh, who was a brilliant headmistress. She'll be demonized in 10 years going, she was evil, and all these things. So it's contextual, but it's certainly a plague in our society and on our young people.
Yes, because the director of the V&A is a former Labour Party MP called Tristram Hunt. I mean, I can't think of a name that is more Victoria and Albert Museum or more Labour Party than Tristram Hunt, to be quite honest. But we've had a comment in from Phil Blair. Now, I'm assuming he's not the brother of Tony Blair, because he says... The Iron Lady didn't take any nonsense. She was superb. She backed free enterprise, wanting people to better themselves, owning their own homes, etc. She wanted people to strive for better. Why can they not like that, Chloe?
I don't know. It seems pretty basic to me, just like how what a woman is seems pretty basic to me. But, you know, these loony lefties, you just can't knock any sense into them. What I do want to add is that the left-wing agenda that has infiltrated the arts industry is absolutely devastating for the few people in the arts that don't subscribe to that agenda. One of the comedians that works at GB News was telling me how now the right-wing comedians, all of the venues, they just stop booking you. They don't want these evil, nasty, right-wing Tories, because, you know, they think that would be like platforming, you know, a nasty villain as they've painted Margaret Thatcher. And so it's killing the careers of so many people in the arts industry that are one of the few that don't subscribe to this crazy woke agenda. That's horrible, to not be able to get a comedy gig just because of your political views is just horrendous. We've seen when Katie Hopkins went on tour, it was an absolute nightmare for her because she had venue after venue cancelling last minute. There were some locations where it seemed like she went for about 5 different venues, each of them cancelling her after the woke mob demanded that she be deplatformed. How about if you don't like her, just don't attend, don't buy a ticket? It's obvious. So straight.
You know, Chloe, just on the back of that quickly, I've got a very close family member who's in the arts industry, you could say, and they don't subscribe personally to these views. They don't personally subscribe to BLM or anything like that. They think it's all nonsense, but they are being forced, they told me, forced to comply with it because they, as you correctly just said, they will be cancelled and they will never have a booking ever again. It's their whole career, because this is it's almost social etiquette for the people in the creative arts to believe in these things, and it's become a dangerous sort of fascism. It's funny that they compare Thatcher to fascists, because they are the actual fascists.
That's a very good point.
They don't want you to have an alternative opinion. They hate it when you debate with them about the topic. They won't even listen to your opinion. So it's quite scary to see that they've infiltrated whole industries and now censor you if you don't prescribe to their ideals.
Yes, so Jim's commented, and Jim says Maggie wouldn't have this crap against our own people. She would have stopped this mass immigration and sent those that commit crime out. It sounds like a really reductive basic point, but I think it resonates with a lot of people. Kath on Facebook says, such a disgusting thing to do, stop funding them with our money. Well, the problem is, Kath, you've got no choice in the matter, right? That's it. It goes to the Treasury, and then the Treasury doles it out like sweets to all of these outfits that are about as pro-British as I don't know what. Now, Perfect Storm says that Margaret Thatcher was the best Prime Minister this country has had since the Second World War. No one has come near her since. I could not agree more. And a Time Lord communism killed millions upon millions. Absolutely,
and still
right.
does, and still does in China.
does.
Let's just say that.
You don't see the Free Palestine lot out on the streets for the million Uyghur Muslims imprisoned in camps in China, do you? But never mind. Right. So I guess my message, just to bring that to a close, would be stick to what you're good at, right? Which is putting up expensive fashion and design, and leave the political commentary to those who actually know what they're talking about, right? And if you've got to take pot shots at Maggie Thatcher, at least have the decency to do it in private whilst you're sipping, I don't know, whatever horrendously expensive latte drink that it is that you're throwing down your gullet.
I love a soya chai latte, by the way. That's
Do not admit that
guilty
on
pleasure.
camera, Chloe. Do not admit that. I am about to
Chai
eject you from
latte
the
is so
stream.
good.
I'm ejecting you from the stream. We've got
It
to
shouldn't
remember.
be a partisan topic. Chai
I
is
would-
just objectively nice.
it sounds very sweet and horrible, but I would just leave it at this. We need to remember that she, in my opinion, whatever you think about the mines, whatever you think about anything else, despite the fact Wilson before her closed more mines than she did, she was a trailblazer, she was a visionary, she was a true British patriot, and you can't say that about many people that we have in political life right now, right? She has a lasting legacy. It's a legacy that lives on long after these petty, vindictive little bastards at the Victoria and Albert Museum have been consigned to the dustbin of history.
That's
I know
the
I did,
third time
but the moment required it. Anyway. Right, we're going to talk about the BBC, speaking of the B word, and I'll try and compose myself. So the BBC have been forced to issue an apology. And you might think, well, what the hell have they done now? By the way, Chloe, Time Lord's just commented saying that what is she drinking? What's a trans milk latte? Anyway, the BBC, they've issued an apology, right? And they've been forced to do this because in an article, they described Reform UK as far right. Now, this article said, the apology, said, in an article about the Liberal Democrats Spring Conference, we wrongly described the political party Reform UK as far right when referring to polling. This sentence was subsequently removed from the article as it fell short of our editorial standards, while the original wording was based on news agency copy, blah, 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 blah. These are the same people that can't even bring themselves to describe a prescribed terrorist organisation as that, a terrorist organisation. So ultimately, I think, the BBC finally really have, well, they've been doing it for quite some time, but they really have gone off the deep end. These are the commissars at Broadcasting House, right, deciding that Richard Tice and Reform UK might as well be card-carrying members of the far right. And basically, according to the BBC, if you're a bit miffed about things like uncontrolled immigration, eco-zealotry that's making us colder and poorer, or the woke brigade's incessant screeching about everything from trans to our history, then you're basically a jackbooted thug. That's what they're saying. And I don't want to pay for a broadcaster that thinks that me and my opinions shared by millions around the country are like that. Where are you at, Chloe?
If you keep using the word far right over and over and over again and just attach the word to everyone, it loses any significance. So by using this word to describe reform, now, most of us just think oh, they slapped the word far right on everything, it doesn't really mean anything. I think that what is annoying me is that stuff like this they just get away with, and as you say, not saying that Hamas are terrorists, they get away with. Yet Ofcom, which I know we're going to move on to shortly, Ofcom will launch at GB News every single day for the slightest thing. They'll make up accusations against them out of nowhere, which are completely weightless. And it's just absolutely pathetic. It is so clear that the organisations that we pay for, Ofcom with our taxpayer money and the BBC with our licence fee, are completely biased.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, this is the same BBC, of course, that spent years trying to actually, well, in my opinion at least, it was doing everything it could to push back against a vote for Brexit, right? It's been obsessing over skin colour. We've all got white privilege, even pushing those messages to our children, and coddling anti-Semites who don't think Hamas are terrorists. I mean, this is a case of pot meet kettle if they think Richard Bloody Tice is some kind of extremist, isn't it?
I mean, anyone who's met Richard, you could think he's farthest from an extremist as possible. I mean, what it says to me is that the BBC the staff at the BBC are so detached from the people of this country, and we're talking about millions of people voting for the Reform Party, by the way, and there is nobody who is voting Reform going, this is the new Nazi party, like this is madness. But the BBC seem to clearly think that's the case. I mean, look at the category we put far right into, and it genuinely is thuggish acting political parties that get into power through violence. That's the sort of general categorization of them, i.e. the Nazis in Germany. So they are so detached. They're these liberal elites who sit in their lovely, beautiful offices and surround themselves again in this sort of ideological circle. And I'm telling you this because I have experience. Someone I used to work with back in the day when I worked at the Labour Party. Please forgive me, everybody. I will repent. I am repenting.
That's worse than Chloe's trans lab.
I know, it really is. But I'm a reformed person. I'm a reformed man talking about reform. But my boss, who was quite a senior political advisor in the Labour Party, is now one of the directors at the BBC, and he was so far left. I mean, he was very, very left, but could present himself as slightly more moderate. And this is the problem. They're very good at masking how far and how far left they are in the BBC. But again, for an organisation that tries to uphold the impartiality, so to speak, that they've been tasked with, they don't represent that in their staff. They actually have the exact opposite of that. And you just see that reflected in all of their programming. We have to double down. Everyone's got to have a gay person, a black person, someone upper class, someone working class. It's gone nuts, and it's not representative of Britain. And calling reform far right is just absolutely mad. It's totally mad, isn't it?
Souljacker commented and they said, I've done a freedom of information request from Ofcom because I want to know how many ex-BBC people are working there. And that's actually a very good question.
That's actually a really good question.
It is. Chloe, what were you going to say?
There's one thing I found hunting recently, I've just brought the article back up, is when I was hunting around the BBC's diversity and inclusion policies, I found an article written by them in 2020 that is titled, "Is it time the all-white period drama was made extinct?" And the article is talking about how it's so problematic that we have these period dramas, which are often set in Britain at a time where there wasn't much immigration and pretty much everybody was white, and we're putting these shows on TV that are filled with white people and the cast is not diverse enough. It's absolutely horrifying to the BBC, apparently. Maybe we should make them extinct and take them off air.
Well, absolutely. We're going to get on to a period drama later on, but anyway,
it will make sense.
That joke will make sense shortly. But we've had another comment from Max, and Max says, I don't think he's a fan because he says Reform is a far-right party made up of wealthy fascist bankers like Nigel Farage.
I mean, this is nuts, isn't it? I mean, This is nuts. I mean, people don't even understand most people don't even understand the definition of fascism clearly, particularly on the left, because they're the ones who are calling for things to be censored, shut down, not having a debate with this person. You're not allowed to come and speak at this university. That's the definition of fascism. It is literally, it is the destruction of any other alternative opinion other than your own. It's insanity that people think that Nigel Farage is a fascist. He's constantly abused online and on TV.
And Kevin says on Facebook, John Humphreys said that the atmosphere at the BBC, John Humphreys been a Radio 4 presenter, the atmosphere at the BBC on the day after the Brexit vote was like being at the wake of a much-loved relative. They were absolutely devastated. Absolutely they were, and they did all they could to, especially Radio 4, by the way. I remember listening to that, the funereal tone throughout it. I was on the BBC on the day of Brexit, and believe me, I was probably the only one in that bloody studio that was actually delighted. But
I'd love to watch that.
it was quite something. But I would just end this by saying that I think the obsession with the bogeyman of the far right actually dilutes what it actually means to be someone on the extreme right or the extreme left, right? Who, as you mentioned, Alex, would resort to violence to achieve their aims, etc., etc. We just had some bloke arrested for wanting to bomb people in the name of eco-extremism and in the name of far-left terrorism. And yet we never hear about that threat, right? It's always the bogeyman of the far right. And if even Richard Tice is far right, then you've lost all meaning of that word and you dilute it at your peril.
And the same goes for all of these words. For example, throwing
racism
around the word racist. If you label that to anyone, it means that we don't actually spot genuine cases of racism anymore, which is a shame.
Well, and I saw Max has just added another comment, so just very, very quickly on this point. And then Darren, you nailed it. And let's look at the people who are being violent on the streets. Let's call a spade. Are they far right? Should we call the Free Palestine marchers? They're far right. Should we call the eco zealots who are blocking ambulances from getting to hospitals? Are they far right? These people are using violence and mass disruption to gain political power, essentially, to gain power over as unelected people are. That's again what the Nazis did. They used aggression to get into power, including storming Parliament in Germany. Those are fascist values. They are not. So people call them socialists and call them left wing. They are far from left wing. These people, they are violent and they use their ideology to try and get power.
Yeah, right. Well, we'll talk about the off-communists now. So that's Nigel Farage. He was on, that's an interview with Camilla Tominey talking about who regularly beats, well, both of them actually regularly beat Sky News and the BBC. And Camilla was interviewing Nigel about this GB News ruling where Ofcom have said that, well, in what was an incredibly political statement, they've come for GB News. Now, I had said at the time, and I just realised I haven't got it up here, but I had said at the time, when I read this ruling straight away, I thought, hang on a minute, because I said, I see Ofcom once again continue their constant attrition against GB News, this time on politicians hosting shows. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. I remember, I've been around this world for a little while now. I can remember a fair few shows being fronted by Labour politicians. LBC, David Lammy, Sundays at 10 a.m. I'd rather shove hot needles in my eye. Chris Bryant, Sunday from 1 p.m. Again, I'd rather shove hot needles in my eye. I'd rather shove a cactus up my bottom than listen to that one. Angela
I think Chris
Rayner.
Bryant might enjoy that.
Well, maybe. Angela Rayner, I do not want to listen to the Ginger Growler talk on LBC for ad nauseum about goodness only knows what. But you go back to this Ofcom decision, and Nigel is absolutely right to argue that it is a nakedly political decision because they haven't done it to the other party. They've never said it about LBC. And it strikes me that what they're saying is that viewers are too thick to tell the difference between a news bulletin read by a news reader who is impartial, and an opinion segment, right? And in their infinite lefty wisdom, they've determined that Jacob Rees-Mogg and Esther McVeigh simply appearing on screen is going to confuse us hopeless plebs, even though the channel clearly differentiates factual news from commentary. that we'll all be confused and sent into a tizzy and not know what's coming and what's going. Pull the other one, you absolute morons. This is an agenda. That's what this is, Alex.
Yeah, it's absolutely an agenda. And funnily enough, Darren, I was invited on the BBC, Ofcom's best friend, uh, to talk about this the other day on BBC Radio Northern Ireland, weirdly enough. And they got on their panel two very strongly opposing people. One of them was an ex-director at Ofcom, and it was very interesting to hear what he had to say, because he hated BBC and GB News. And I made the point of saying, well, look, Nigel Farage regularly beats BBC and Sky News, and he went on this absolute devastating rant about how GB News was basically illegal and all these things. And it just proves that the people who are working there are out to get us, or the ex-people who used to work there, are still out to get us as well. And GB News, I go on the show regularly, Darren, I know you guys do too as well, but it's always got a counterbalance in the show. It's always got a left wing. I am never unchallenged in my opinions, and I'm probably more right wing than a lot of the people who go on GB News. But I'm never left unchallenged. I'm always challenged, if it's not by a presenter, but by another left wing guest on the show every single week. So these people don't even watch GB News. It's very clear, and they obviously don't like the fact there are Tory Conservative MPs on the channel. And I'll wrap this up by saying one more final thing on my perspective as well. GB News regularly attacks the Conservative Party, because I know I do. I know you do, Darren. I know other guests on the show regularly attack the Tories. And so to call us this sort of Tory outlet is just so far from the truth. Yes, there may be some presenters on there who are Conservative MPs, but we've got Gloria Di Piero, who is also an ex-Labour MP. And I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect producers have reached out to ex-Labour MPs and current Labour MPs to get their shows on GB News too, but they probably said, no, I don't want to go on there. So, what we do our best. We always do our best.
I get so many lefties that say I won't ever appear on GB News, but they're more than happy to appear on Murdoch's Talk TV. And I think you prefer Rupert Murdoch over a fledgling media startup that is proposing to speak to working class communities up and down the country. I just don't understand that. But Chloe, do you think that what this is all about ultimately is that the metropolitan, the media elite, of established broadcasters, they just can't abide the existence of an upstart who don't conform to their progressive world view, right? They're desperate to actually paint GB News viewers as gullible rubes who have been hoodwinked by scheming rich Tories. It's utter tripe, isn't it? Ordinary Brits aren't nearly as stupid as Ofcom seems to believe, despite the fact that we're stupid enough to fund these charlatans.
Ofcom have clearly exposed themselves exactly for who they are with this attack on GB News. They've really shot themselves in the foot with this attack, and GB News have exposed them for what they really, really are. Now everyone can see, because this attack is so insane and irrational, what their agenda really is. Before this, some people would have had doubts if Ofcom with their previous investigations were just doing their job or if they had an agenda. It is now clear as day who these people really are. Politicians are allowed to be on air and talk. They're just not allowed to break news. Yes, they've gone after GB News. They also did go after Talk TV. They went after Jake Berry. I've been on Jake Berry's show many times. And when there is breaking news to be read out, they bring somebody else in the studio to do it. They're just attacking anybody who is conservative or reform or anyone on the right who wants to host the show, because they can't bear. This is the thing with the left, is rather than actually debating people who they disagree with, they spend all their time and energy just trying to shut their voices down because they don't have a good argument against us.
Yeah, interestingly, during that you're just sort of nailing it there, Clay. During that podcast I went on, the radio channel I went on with the BBC, and the Ofcom director, they said, well, Nigel Farage is a politician. And I was like, but is that what it says in Ofcom's guidance? Because I don't think it is, because Nigel Farage is an honorary president. He's not the president of Reform, let's be clear. And he's not standing for election at the moment either. So no one's voting. So I kept on having to explain to them what is the rules? And even the ex-Ofcom director didn't seem to know what defined a politician, which is striking. And I said, why don't Ofcom put out some clear rules? If they look, the reality is GB News don't want to get slapped by Ofcom. Like, this is a fact. They don't want to be in trouble with Ofcom, but the Ofcom rules are so obscure and they're such an enigma that you have to try and navigate your way around them somehow. And look, the same with the People's Forum, it's just, like the Prime Minister was invited to an audience of people, and it's still that broken partiality rules. How?
And it was an audience of people that were put together by an independent polling company.
Exactly.
And we knew nothing about the questions in advance. So that again is complete not a nonsense. But just to highlight what you said and what GB News actually replied with, they said, extraordinarily, Ofcom has determined that a programme which it acknowledges was impartial and lacking in any expression of opinion still somehow breaches its impartiality rules, just because an imaginary viewer might think otherwise. Ofcom has now arbitrarily changed the test so that it's no longer was it impartial, but could someone think it might not be? Now, how convenient is that, right? How convenient is that at a moment when we're saying British broadcasting is in dire need of a shake-up, we're going to do something about it, and a few delicate sensibilities within this Ofcom, this regulator, these Ofcommunists, they get offended in the process. The last thing that we actually need is a bunch of unaccountable bureaucrats putting the squeeze on any channel that dares to shake up the stuffy status quo. I think, frankly, GB News, and I'm saying this in a personal capacity, not in a business capacity, GB News should tell Ofcom to sod off, right? The viewing public are crying out for a bit of variety, for some presenters with personality. And if these pearl-clutching Puritans can't handle it, when they're bloody well welcome to change the channel.
I think that GB News was really brave to put out this, because until now, GB News has been in a really difficult position where Ofcom have kept on hammering them with investigation after investigation. But if GB News launch an attack back at them, Ofcom potentially have the power to take them off the air and end the project. So they've been at the whim of Ofcom's demands. So for them to come out and be brave enough to put out this damning statement with, the risks that comes with, that means that Ofcom will potentially, make their attacks against them even stronger because they've now, made the relationship perhaps not as friendly. It was a really brave thing for them to do, but I think it just got to the point where something had to be said because Ofcom was just abusing them.
Yeah. Chloe, I'll just add to that because, look, and I've said this so many times now, there are certain channels which I think Ofcom should apply to, particularly public-funded ones. I don't understand why for private businesses and private independent news outlets, there needs to be a regulator of free speech. The audience can simply choose to flick over the channel. I do think there is always value in having a publicly funded organization that gives news in a very, very straight format that is censored to a certain extent. So there is always a reliable place you can get news. Not that I'm saying the BBC is doing a very good job of that, by the way. But for GB News and Talk TV and anyone, LBC included, by the way, and Channel 4 included, Channel 4 is actually public, so let's exclude them. But for any private broadcaster, there shouldn't be these restrictions on freedom of speech. They're basically saying, you Brits, you're too stupid and dumb to see through what's an opinion and what's news. That to me is demeaning, and I think Ofcom should be shut down, wrapped up, and just rolled into some BBC legislation that says that's your rules, BBC, Channel 4, and anyone else that's publicly funded.
Yeah, or better still, we could just stop funding the bloody BBC, in my opinion. I'm just so sick of being dictated to by these self-appointed moral betters, these arbiters of what is and isn't impartial, what is and isn't truth, what is and isn't racism, what is and isn't fascism, what is and isn't far right, what is and isn't transphobic, these isms and phobias. I'm so sick of it all, and it is making our country worse. We do not have time to focus on this shit, right? We have serious problems. I've just sworn again. We have serious problems as a country, and we need to move. And speaking of stuff that we don't have time to focus on, actually, I'm going to move on to our next discussion. Now, I want to talk to you about
the period
this
drama joke you were making, Darren, was it?
Yes, it is my period drama joke. Yes, this is the period drama that we're talking about. Now, so this is from the Times. Lawyer sued after saying only women have periods. This woman is Elspeth Wrigley, who shared gender-critical statements via DEFRA. Now, DEFRA is the Department for Food and Food and Rural Affairs, even. I'm still on Ofcom. Food and Rural Affairs. And a lawyer and the government's department she works with are being sued after she made gender-critical statements at work, including expressing the belief that only women menstruate. So only women have periods. Now, Elspeth works at an arm's-length body that's actually affiliated to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, as I mentioned. And she's the chairwoman of a civil service network that represents staff with gender-critical views. Now, she was a signatory to an explosive letter sent in October to the Cabinet Secretary, warning that the impartiality of the civil service was under threat because anyone with gender-critical views was openly and unlawfully bullied and harassed. Now, that's really strong language, and it's a confidential letter that was sent, and it's been leaked. Now, it seems to me that the trans inquisition is very much on the march. They're feeling that they were on the front foot. This has been very pervasive. It's been everywhere, and no longer is that the case. They're not content with bullying people on Twitter anymore. They're now going after anyone who dares to actually question their dogma, right, from Canada to Britain. And I just want to quickly, just to set out the stall, talk about this story. Now, this is Unheard, which is a good blog that you should all read. But as you can see at the bottom, I haven't actually subscribed to it, which is a bit awkward. But this is Unheard, nonetheless. And it says, will the nurse who supported J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, of course, see justice? Now, this is Amy Ham, a Canadian nurse. And yesterday was the final day of hearings into a disciplinary case against her, which has dragged on for 18 months. It's been a nightmare for her, obviously. The punishment is often way worse than anything that they can actually do. The trial is way worse than the punishment, they can give to you. But it's also a test case of how Canada is prepared to go to enforce an authoritarian ideology on women. It has nothing to do with how she does her job. The British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives opened an investigation after just 2 people complained that she was one of the sponsors of a billboard praising the author J.K. Rowling in 2020. The author of this piece says, this is heresy in Canada, where transgender ideology enjoys the status of Holy Writ and Rowling is regarded as chief witch. Now, that is absolutely right. The regulator going at her like a pack of rabid beavers, producing this. It was a 332-page report that might as well have been labelled The Heretic's Guide to Wrongthink. Now, these 2 stories, they might well appear to be completely, people in the comments are already saying things like, this is complete nonsense. What are you talking about this for? How ridiculous. But this stuff matters because this is a woman who's associated with the civil service, supposedly impartial civil service, who should be ensuring that the country is running as efficiently and effectively as possible, actually unable to say that women are the only ones that have periods. And then in Canada, under Justin Trudeau, and we're about to get a woke government just like Canada has endured since 2016, actually saying that she supported J.K. Rowling on a billboard and therefore has to lose her job. This is more serious than it might first appear. Would you agree with that?
This is a total dystopian nightmare, and Scotland is becoming our Canada in the UK. If you see the laws that the SNP are pumping out over there, it's absolutely terrifying. We're going to get to a point where the Labour Party just last week blocked Liz Truss's bill on basically protecting women and saying that, look, a man is a man. You should be allowed in a free society. If you are so-called anti-fascist and the left-wing anti-fascist, you should be allowed to call something whatever you like, and particularly, especially if it's a fucking fact. Excuse my language. I'm so sorry. Especially if it's a fact. And it is a fact that a man is a man and only women can menstruate. And these aren't things that should be censored or should be legislated against, frankly. We've got to a point now where you're particularly for the LGBTQ plus XYZ group, that you're going to get a series of people that have privilege. That's not equality. There is a difference between equality and privilege. And someone's allowed to come up to me in the street and call me a woman, and because I'm not trans, that's not illegal. By misgendering a straight person, a white person, sorry. And but if you are trans, you'll be able to take someone to prison and take them to court for it and take all their money off them. J.K. Rowling is attacked every day. In fact, she's been on Twitter today. Someone's been targeting the wrong woman. A trans account has been doxing a woman in Portugal, saying that this is J.K. Rowling's daughter. And J.K. Rowling saying, that's not my daughter. You're doxing someone in a foreign country. And she's now going to take them to court over it. Because this is the kind of dangerous ideology. This is the kind of dangerous thought that this line of thought this place takes us. It's scary.
Yeah, Chloe, before you respond to that, I'm just going to read out some comments. Time Lord says trans holidays to Gaza next. that would work. Although, incidentally, as it happens, Iran do like transing people because they would prefer that over a gay outcome. But hey ho, that's another conversation for another day. Time Lord also says we need to laugh at these woke clowns. And in Scotland, Slim is talking about dumbs are useless. So I assume that's hums are useless.
So speaking of dumbs are useless, if you go back to the Unheard article and scroll down to there's a paragraph about SNP policy that I think was quite shocking that we should read out. So the paragraph beginning with of course.
Of course.
This one here.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, of course, there is. It's a simple statement of fact, yet the Canadian government is proposing legislation that includes a power to arrest someone who might commit a hate crime in future, forcing them to wear an electronic tag or remain at home. The prospect of a future Amy Ham being placed under house arrest in Canada may seem outlandish, but trans activists in Scotland who are salivating over the prospect of using the hate crime law that comes into effect on 1st of April to target Rowling must be looking on with envy. And that's the question that Slim actually has for you, Chloe, which is, what are your thoughts on the Scottish hate crime laws as of April 1st?
Absolutely bonkers. Now, what's interesting about these Scottish hate crime laws that are coming in is that it protects transgender people from hate crimes, but it doesn't protect women. Only transgender is on the list, but gender is not on the list of people who can possibly have a hate crime committed against them. Now, the SNP has launched this hate monster campaign, which our contributor John kindly made a video for us on, which I'll recommend you go and watch. Now, if you just take a quick Google, look up the Scottish hate monster campaign, and you will see there that the article, one of the first things it says is that young white males are the most likely to commit hate crimes.
Yeah.
Stop demonizing these people.
It's
just horrendous.
They probably have taken it down. There
No way. That's what John's video did. It's had an effect.
Well done, John. Well done, John.
There's actually, if you go onto their YouTube, you might still find the video, the hate monster video. If you look up the hate monster on YouTube.
Well, Susan has said, oh, grow up, she's speaking the truth. When we all stop pretending this nonsense, we can start living again and make this country a better place. And I have to say, I completely agree. I really do. We just have not got time to be focusing on these issues. And I just feel deeply sorry for all of those whose lives are going to be turned upside down, because it's like the Stasi had a love child with the Keystone Cops. This is the bureaucratic nightmare straight out of Orwell's fevered imagination. This is the world we're living in, Alex.
Yeah, it's really scary. And this is such a massive distraction from what's going on not
Yeah.
just in Britain, but around the world. We're living at the height, the most tense point on the world is balancing on a needle thread at the moment. It's crazy. And we've got these people who seem to think that they're special and above the law, demanding we legislate for them, demanding that politicians give them privilege over women. This is men again. This is mostly men, trans men, that are going after women's rights, going after women's spaces. The same left that were just a few years ago radical feminists are now the exact opposite to that. This is the problem. It's when is the next thing? And I worry about what the next thing is going to be. Because if you told me 10 years ago in my 20s that we were going to be having a conversation about what a man is, what a woman is, I would have laughed. I would have laughed at you. It's got so bad in one decade, this sense of privilege and this sense of, I should have more laws than you. I should have more rights than you because I'm this special person. Well, I really fear for the future of our country. I really do, because one day these people will be our politicians.
Yeah,
You're
and I mean,
absolutely
it does
right,
say
Alex.
it's just to quickly read that out, Chloe. It says fury over Police Scotland's hate monster campaign because this bizarre advert supporting Humza Yousaf's new hate crime laws, as we said, coming into force on April 1st, slammed for suggesting offences are mainly committed by young white men from deprived areas. Well, statistically, Chloe, I'm afraid that is complete and utter bollocks.
I haven't seen the exact stats on which groups, but I don't think that the person that wrote the article really took a deep dive themselves. They thought, who is evil? I know, young white men. We will put that first in the article. It's just absolutely bonkers. So I'm not surprised that they've taken it down. Going back to what Alex was saying there, you're absolutely right, Alex, that the world has bigger fish to fry than debating what a woman is at the moment. We're letting the country fall apart whilst we all talk about what a woman is. Now, you might say, well, aren't you hypocrites because you're talking about it? I don't want to have to talk about the trans issue. I don't want to have to debate what a woman is. But the reality is that if we don't fight this fight, I hope that we can and get it over with, we are going to let them walk all over us as they currently are. You're living in a failed society when you can be sued for saying that only women have periods. And the trans agenda is so evil because what it does is it puts really strict conditions on living a normal life. You cannot have a job and earn an income unless you run your own business if you don't subscribe to this trans ideology. The reality is now that you always have to be self-employed if you want to have an opinion on anything, especially gender ideology. You cannot come in our building if you are not happy with the fact that we allow males, biological males, into the female bathroom that you're going to go to the toilet in. If you say anything about that, you're not allowed to come into this public building. This has a real impact on people's lives.
And can I just tag along the back of that quickly, Chloe, as well? Because you're right. What's happened over the last decade is that we haven't spoke about the people that are infiltrating legislation, essentially. They've been very quiet. They've been very loud. But the rest of us have gone, oh, what a laugh. Just let them get on with it and have their day. They've snuck in through the back door. There are a very, very small minority of people, actually. Very small minority, but they are very loud. And until people start talking about this and people who are on the opposite side of the debate show, actually, we're voters and we don't like this at all, then it will continue to infiltrate our society to the point that it's legislated against. And then, it's game over.
It's going to be a hell of a lot worse under Labour. Devil's advocate extraordinaire has commented on YouTube, they'll have so many reports for so-called hate crimes that it will, in the long run, devalue true hate crimes. Absolutely right. And it goes back to that point that we said before about the far-right label. But if you dare question any of this, as you've rightly identified, you better be prepared for the consequences, right? Just ask Maya Forstater, who lost her job for expressing gender-critical views. And by gender-critical views, by the way, I mean believing in biological sex and single-sex spaces. There was Rachel Mead, who was a social worker who was suspended for a year for the crime of liking a few tweets. The message, even at my own football club along the road there was a woman lost her membership of the club because of the fact that she had tweeted things about the self-ID, and the Premier League had their own form of Stasi investigating this. The message is absolutely clear to me. You toe the line or you face the wrath of the trans Stasi. And here's the thing, right? That women have absolutely been fighting for centuries to have their voice heard, their rights respected. And I don't think that women watching this should sit down and shut up just because some bunch of deluded blokes in dresses tell them to, right? From the suffragettes to the second wave feminism, women have absolutely always been at the forefront. They were on the side, many of them, on the side of gays at the time as well, on the fight for equality and justice, genuine equality and justice, not trampling over the rights of other people. But now, with the likes of Amy Ham, that we just mentioned, and Elspeth Wrigley, they're taking on the trans Taliban and their authoritarian agenda. And I think we've got to do more of that. And I'm probably about to be arrested right now because there are trans cars in the Northumbria police have trans flags on the side of their cars. I'm a goner. I'm a goner.
You know what? I get so many messages from people saying, thank you so much for speaking the truth, because I can't, because I would lose my job. And that just saddens me so much, knowing there's so many people who can't post anywhere anything about their political views because they will lose their ability to earn an income, put food on the table for their family and pay their bills. That is horrifying.
Yeah, it's extremely horrifying. I mean, you know, I work with a lot of business people in my spare time, in my real job, should I say. This is my spare
That's
time.
how you still got a job, Alex.
I know, but I'm lucky to work in a company that my boss actually hates all this stuff, and he wants to see the end of all the wokeism, because he won't hire, and many business people won't hire these radical lefties. They'll take one look at their profiles and go, oh my God, this person's going to be a political nightmare. They're going to take offense to everything. I'm going to have to give name badges out. And businesses just want to make money. And so they're getting big companies like Google and Apple. Well, they've got so much money, they can't go bankrupt. But most small businesses live, you know, year to year, month to month, quarter to quarter. They live like the rest of us do. And so they haven't got time to be wasting talking about these things. So I do think you will see this sustained in the big companies, which is unfortunately a big problem when they're generating AI. We saw that recently where you type in make me a picture of a Nazi, and it was probably a black woman or something, because you have to be diverse. It's a problem when they do control the future, but I think you'll find most businesses are just so sick of it.
Right, we've got to bring proceedings to a close. I'm going to read out a couple of messages. Susan Vining, says, I'm a retired midwife. I can guarantee only women have periods, only women have a cervix, not people with a cervix, as the NHS cervical screening letter says. Only women give birth and only women breastfeed. What do they not understand? The problem is, Susan, they used to understand this. And then Ron says, when absurdity becomes the rule, madness is never far behind. Well, I think that's a very potent note to end it on. Alex Armstrong and Chloe Dobbs, thank you very much for your time. We'll hopefully see you all again next week, where we'll go through even more of the madness, because I tell you what, Reasoned UK is never short of content to make. Thanks, guys.
See you all next Wednesday, guys. Tune in.